Good morning. I want to take you back to a few pictures from Dallas, which will come up again in some other videos. It's a condo I owned starting in 1985 in Pleasant Grove on Lake June. There's the back of it. And the car, that was a Dodge Colt at the time, which broke down on Lake June when it was only 2 years old when the clutch started slipping, when I was a mile from home. There's the Dallas Cathedral of Hope. And this is a different picture. This is a picture where 267 in Northern Virginia meets I-66 going towards Washington, D.C. And I had a dual clutch failure in Leesburg a few days before and left it there, and they thought it had fixed itself, and then it broke down again. And then at Coons Ford I had to have about $5,000 worth of work done, although about $4,000 was covered by extended warranty, and I was okay. So it wasn't real bad financially, but to get stuck like that in heavy traffic, maybe where there's where a shoulder is cut off by a jug handle for construction, can really be dangerous. So let me get back to the main topic here. Is I talked on May the 5th about identity and why we have all kinds of identities that we assign ourselves, but generally they don't have to be gendered, and they're what we do, but most of the time they have very little to do with gender, was the theme of that video, despite what's going on. I just wanted to expand upon that by going back to mentioning the story that back in 1981, when I was working for a Blue Cross consortium, the first job I had in Dallas, a woman who was a little bit critical, and it was a time when things were not going well with the project, and people who work with me, if anybody sees this video, they probably remember there was lots of responsibility to go around of what went wrong with that project. But anyway, a woman who sat across from me in a cubicle asked me if I could go, since I was a man, if I could go down and change her tire for her, because her tire apparently was flat in the parking lot down below next to the high-rise building in Dallas near Stemmons Freeway. And I said, no, I really am not very capable of doing that for you. And said, she said, well, men are supposed to be able to change tires and fix things for women. She actually said that. And that gets me into the topic of, getting back to the topic of identity, as to why this is such an emotional topic. As far as, I have a biological sex assigned, which is male, and I've never, despite being gay, or in fact, it actually amplifies being gay in my case. I don't challenge it. So I don't assign myself another identity. I don't need to assign myself an identity and analyze my role in society and assign myself an identity to see if I fit into some kind of protected class. I'm just simply a biological male, and that's it. But I do understand that some people, I did have a lot of problems with developmental coordination disorder, or dyspraxia, when I was growing up. That's not generally considered associated with gender. Young girls can have it too. And I had the measles before. But if this were to happen today, people would be questioning whether I could fulfill the roles of being a man. And I can imagine the pressure I might be under in some environments in some parts of the country today to possibly, if I were a child, I just wonder if I would be pressured to transition or something to an identity and claim an identity that was more along the lines of my capabilities. Back in 2018, this was well before the pandemic, and well before this was well known. Helen Joyce, for her book, explained why trans radicalism hurts women, children, and trans people themselves in Quillette. And then I picked up on that in a tweet. I quoted her tweet, and I'll put it in the description. It says in this in this quote when they're trying to match people's identities to what they can do. Being a woman in a British cultural context often means adhering to social norms of femininity, such as being nurturing, caring, social, emotional, vulnerable, and concerned with appearance. For men, the list of attributes runs being competitive, ambitious, independent, rational, tough, sexual, confident, dominant, taking risks, and caring about their work. Well, I fit some of those, but some of those I don't fit. And that's probably true of a lot of people. And so I think there is a belief particularly among the left, is that if you want to express yourself publicly, which I do myself and by myself, you actually need to be able to work with others first. You're not above being with others who you think are dependent on you or something. You need to be able to provide for others first. You need to see yourself as part of a social unit. So you need to be willing to construct an identity, and you need to be willing to accept the idea that in practical society, some aspects of an identity you construct for yourself may be gendered. And so they may actually, in the most extreme parts of their gender ideology, they want to remove sex entirely from the law and replace it with gender identity categories, which could be more than two of them. As you know, in some indigenous societies, homosexual males are viewed as another gender, which they're obviously not in terms of sex. But they're treated as if they were, and required and expected to support the people who do have children for the tribe, and to fight for the tribe, or to be more nurturing. They don't actually go out on their own like we do in the West. So you may, in the thinking of the left, since this is kind of mandatory that you fit into some form of comradeship, you ought to be able to decide what groups you choose to belong to, and then, according to what your abilities are, is sorted from each according to his ability, and to each according to his needs, or something like that. They don't want the family just doing that. You get to choose that, and on your own self-identification, which Helen Joyce talks about in that article all the way back in 2018, even long before most of us realized this was going on. You identify as part of a group that fits your abilities, and if that group happens to be maligned some way or marginalized, then you have the benefits of having the law protect you because you belong to a marginalized group. Which means that when when others criticize you, even when they're right and saying logical things, you have a right to shut them down, because their criticism may put you in more danger. That's their thinking. And so that's a very dangerous way of thinking. That's a very dangerous way to see things, and a very frightening idea. I had mentioned in the May 5th video Paul Rosenfels's polarities, and the idea that polarities, which could be feminine and masculine and objective and subjective and so forth, are used for personal growth, are not used as labels for legal rights and so forth. But some people seem to think that you have to use them as a label, and then not only that you should try to change your appearance so you look like someone who belongs to that group, or sort of look partially like that. And even the degree of how binary you are is itself part of the label, because you can have non-binary. So I will say I would also say something about that photo of me by the roadside. Well, it doesn't want to that the only time I ever had a tire blowout was in 1969. When I was driving back from D.C., where my parents were, to Fort Eustis, Virginia, where I was stationed when I was in the Army, and southeast of Richmond on the way to, but before I got onto US 60. I had a blowout on the interstate, and I really wasn't competent to change the tire. Fortunately, another service member from Fort Eustis came by and helped me and took me over to a gas station. And somehow we got the tire changed or got the car towed, and on my way. And that's the only time that's ever happened. I have AAA membership, which I depend on because I'm not really competent to do these things. I think the other thing that I would say is that we may be heading for a society where if you want to defend individualism, even for people like me, and allow them to be more independent, as I've been very independent of groups, you want them to have more competence, display more competences that they can do more things for themselves than and be less dependent on being lucky enough to have money or something, show that they can do more to earn what they have themselves when they have to. And then we've been requiring that kind of fits into the idea of social credit, and that might be an idea that we would embrace. So anyway, I just wanted to recap the idea that it does mean something to assign yourself a category that is connected to gender and say that there are more than two of them. Say there may be multiple characters that some of them denote a degree of how binary you are, and then you could then, in theory, eliminate sex. At least the far left thinks that. I don't want that personally. No, I'm much better off simply not assigning anything at all and being a male and doing what I want and not being expected to join anybody for anything or expected to let other people speak for me or speak for them. I'm much better off doing things for myself, but I may not be allowed to do that forever. So I sort of get the point of what they're trying to do. So that's just kind of what I wanted to go over this morning. And I do thank you for listening.